They say you can't die twice, but I'm living proof you can. First time was in a Bangkok newspaper, courtesy of my girlfriend. Second time was watching my bank account flatline while I was supposedly 6 feet under. The dead don't need money, right? If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our long-time viewers. He asked us not to share his name, but he wanted his experience heard. I'd been planning my escape from Lismore for 3 years. At 58, after 35 years rewiring houses and fixing air conditioners, my back was shot and my marriage was over. The divorce settlement gave me enough to start fresh somewhere warm. "You're too old to be starting over, Gordon," my ex-wife had said during our final meeting at the lawyer's office. "What are you going to do? Become one of those sad old men, chasing young girls in Thailand?" I didn't argue with her. Maybe she was right, but staying in Australia felt like dying slowly. Thailand kept calling my name. Cheap living, beautiful weather, and from what I'd heard, women who appreciated. Older Western men. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to share meals with and maybe help me navigate the culture. "I just want to be happy for whatever years I have left," I told my daughter before I left. She rolled her eyes, but hugged me goodbye. Anyway, I booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok, then took the bus down to Pattaya. The plan was simple: rent a small condo, live modestly on my pension, and enjoy whatever years I had left without the constant rain and loneliness of Australia. She found me at a beachside bar on my third night in Pattaya. I was nursing a beer, watching the sunset, feeling optimistic about my new life for the first time in months. "You look lonely," Sirikan said, sliding onto the bar stool next to me. She was different from the other bar girls, older, maybe early 40s, with a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. "I'm not lonely," I replied, though we both knew I was lying. "Just enjoying the view." She smiled and ordered herself a Coke, not beer. "I work at a restaurant near here," she said in careful English. "You new to Pattaya?" We talked about Australia, about her family upcountry, about how Pattaya had changed over the years. She didn't immediately ask for drinks or money, which surprised me. Most of the women I'd met so far had been very direct about their intentions. "I save money to open my own small business," she explained when I asked about her dreams. "Maybe little coffee shop or internet cafe." When she offered to show me around the real Pattaya, not the tourist traps, I said yes without hesitation. "Tomorrow I show you good market, where locals eat," she promised. "Not expensive like walking. Street." Within 2 weeks, she was staying at my rented condo most nights. It felt natural, comfortable. She cooked Thai food that didn't burn my tongue off and laughed at my terrible attempts to speak Thai. "You say I love chicken but sound like I love man." She giggled after one particularly embarrassing restaurant incident. For the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. After a month, Sirikan suggested we get a nicer place together. "Your room very small," she said one morning while making coffee in my cramped kitchenette. "And neighbors too noisy." I know better. Place not too expensive. My rental was small and in a noisy area full of drunk tourists stumbling home at all hours. She knew of a 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town, still affordable, but more space for both of us. "We split everything 50-50, she insisted when I hesitated. "I not want your money for free." It made sense. We were spending every night together anyway, and splitting rent would actually save me money. I was still being careful with my finances, but the cost was reasonable. "Okay," I said, "but I pay deposit since I have savings account here." The new place felt like home immediately. Sirikan decorated it with plants and colorful curtains that made everything feel warmer. "Now looked like real home, not sad old man cave," she teased, arranging orchids on the windowsill. She introduced me to her friends, took me to local markets, where I was the only foreigner. I felt like I was finally living in Thailand, not just visiting it. "This my boyfriend Gordon," she would say proudly to shopkeepers and waitresses. "He very good man from Australia." She mentioned her family occasionally. Her mother was sick, her brother needed help with his motorcycle taxi business, but she never directly asked for money, which I appreciated. "Family very important in Thailand," she explained. "We take care of each other." Some of my new expat friends warned me about getting too involved too quickly, but Sirikan seemed genuine. "Just be careful, mate," said Jerry, a British retiree I'd met at a coffee shop. "They're all sweet until they've got their hooks in you." But Jerry was bitter about his own failed relationship. Sirikan was different. 3 months in, Sirikan came home crying. I'd never seen her so upset, and it scared me. "What's wrong?" I asked, pulling her close on our small couch. "My mother," she sobbed into my shoulder. "She collapsed today. In hospital now." Her mother had collapsed and was in the hospital upcountry. The family couldn't afford the treatment. Something about her heart requiring surgery they couldn't pay for. "Hospitals say need operation or she die," Sirikan explained through tears. "But cost too much. My family have no money." Sirikan needed to go home immediately, but she was short on money for the bus fare and to help with medical bills. It was the first time she'd asked me for anything directly. "How much do you need?" I asked without thinking. 5,000 baht for bus and help family," she said quietly. "I pay you back when I can." 5,000 baht, about $200. It seemed reasonable for a medical emergency. I gave her the money without hesitation, withdrawing it from the ATM while she packed a small bag. She was so grateful, crying again as I pressed the bills into her hand. "You saved my mother life," she whispered. "I never forget this." She left that evening, texting me updates from the bus, then from the hospital. "Mother stable now, doctor say surgery tomorrow, thank you so much." I missed her terribly. The apartment felt empty without her laughter and cooking smells. I found myself checking my phone constantly for updates. When she returned a week later, she looked exhausted but relieved. "Mother okay now," she said, falling into my arms. "Doctors say operation success. She going home soon." That night, she made my favorite symptom, and we didn't talk about money. I didn't ask when she'd pay me back because it didn't matter. Her mother was alive, and that was worth more than $200. Over the next few months, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Sirikan introduced me to her extended circle of friends and even took me to meet some relatives, visiting Bangkok. "This my Gordon," she would announce proudly. "He helped my family when mother's sick." I felt accepted, part of something bigger than just the expat bubble most foreigners lived in. She was teaching me practical Thai phrases and local customs, like how to properly greet older people and which fork to use when eating. "In Thailand, we use spoon to eat rice, not fork," she corrected gently. "Fork only to push food." When my Australian friends visited for a week, she played the perfect hostess, impressing them with her warmth and intelligence. "You've done well." "For yourself, Gordon," my mate Paul said over dinner. "She's a keeper." I was proud to have her by my side. She occasionally mentioned financial pressures, her family's ongoing struggles, friends in need, but she was subtle about it, never demanding. "My niece need money for school uniform," she might mention while we watched TV. But her father, "Try to find extra work." When I offered help, she seemed genuinely reluctant to accept it, which made me trust her more. "You already do so much," she would protest. "I cannot ask for more." The amounts were always small, always for specific emergencies. Her niece's school fees, medicine for her aging father, repairs to her family's roof after a storm. I was living comfortably on my pension and savings, so helping out felt natural. She always expressed overwhelming gratitude, and I could see the relief in her eyes when crisis was averted. "You like angels sent from heaven," she said after I helped pay for her nephew's motorcycle repairs. Thai men not so generous with family. 6 months into our relationship, Sirikan brought up something that caught me completely off guard. We were having dinner at a local seafood restaurant, sharing grilled fish and sticky rice, when she mentioned life insurance. "My friend Noi very sad today," she said, poking at her fish with her chopsticks. "Her boyfriend died in motorcycle accident yesterday." A friend of hers, she explained, had recently lost her foreign boyfriend in a motorcycle accident. The poor woman was left with nothing. No money, no legal rights to anything because they weren't married. "It's so sad," Sirikan continued, her voice heavy with sympathy. "She loved him so much, 3 years together, but his family in America take everything. She cannot even keep photos." The conversation made me uncomfortable, but I understood her. Point: if something happened to me, what would happen to her? We weren't married, so legally she'd have no claim to anything. It seemed unfair after everything we'd built together. "I not want to think about sad things," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "But Noi's story make me worry. What happened if something happened to you?" She wasn't pushing for marriage. She said she understood I wasn't ready for that after my divorce, but maybe there were other ways to make sure she'd be taken care of. "Some of my friends, their boyfriend add them to bank account," she mentioned casually. "Or life insurance, just in case something happened." The topic made me realize how much I'd grown to care about her. The thought of her being left with nothing if something happened to me genuinely bothered me. "I don't want to think about it." "Tither," I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand, "but you're right, it's not fair." I told her I'd look into it. "You're so good to me," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I promise I take care of you too." The next week I visited the Bangkok bank branch where I'd opened my account. The process of adding Sirikan as a beneficiary was surprisingly simple. "You just need her ID copy and sign these forms," the banker explained in perfect English. "If something happened to you, she can access funds after proper documentation." It seemed like a reasonable safety net. I also looked into life insurance, options for expats in Thailand. The policies were affordable, and adding Sirikan as a beneficiary gave me peace of mind I hadn't expected. "You smart to plan ahead," the insurance agent said. "Many foreigners not think about this until too late." When I told Sirikan what I'd done, she cried with gratitude. "You really love me," she whispered, holding me tight in our apartment. "I promise I never let you down. I take care of you until we both old." The changes felt like a natural progression of our relationship. We were building a life together, and this was just being responsible about the future. I gave her copies of the relevant documents. She said she'd keep them safe at her sister's house in case anything happened to our apartment. "I put in safe place," she promised, carefully folding the papers. "Never lose important documents." That night she cooked an elaborate dinner and talked about our future together. "Maybe next year we travel to Australia so I meet your family," she suggested while serving my favorite green curry. "And maybe we start small business in Pattaya. You know about electrical. I know about local people." The conversation was full of hope and possibility. I fell asleep that night, feeling more secure and loved than I had in years. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning in November. I was riding my motorbike to the market, something I'd done hundreds of times before. The roads were slick from the overnight rain, and I was being extra careful, taking the turns slowly and keeping my distance from other vehicles. "Be safe today," Sirikan had called from the bathroom as I left. "Rain make road dangerous." A pickup truck ran a red light at the intersection near the beach. I remember seeing it coming, the awful realization that I couldn't stop in time, the screech of brakes that wouldn't help. Then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in Pattaya hospital with a concussion, broken ribs and a shattered left leg. The room was white and sterile, filled with the smell of disinfectant and the sound of machines beeping. "You very lucky man," the doctor said when he saw I was awake. "Few more minutes and you not here." Through the haze of painkillers, I kept asking for Sirikan. "Where is she? Did someone call her?" The nurses said a woman had been by to check on me, but I'd been unconscious. They gave me her phone number from my emergency contacts. When I finally reached her, she sounded strange, distant, almost cold. "Gordon, you alive?" she said, as if she was surprised to hear my voice. "I thought you were dead," she continued simply. "Hospital call and say you might not make it. I very scared." She came to visit once, briefly, bringing some fruit and flowers. But she seemed uncomfortable, checking her phone constantly, eager to leave. "I cannot stay long," she explained. "Need to work, pay bills." When I asked her to bring me some clothes from the apartment, she said she'd been staying with her sister since the accident. "Our place feel too empty without you," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I come back when you better." Something in her tone didn't sit right, but I was too weak and confused to push it. The accident had shaken both of us, I reasoned. People react differently to trauma. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital before they released me to recover at home. Sirikan picked me up, but she seemed distracted during the ride back to our apartment. "How you feeling?" she asked. but her attention was elsewhere. When we arrived, I noticed things were different. Some of her belongings were gone. Clothes, personal items, even some of the decorations she'd put up. The apartment felt hollow, missing pieces of the life we'd built together. "Where are your things?" I asked, leaning heavily on my crutches. "I moved some to my sister house for safekeeping," she explained quickly. "During your hospital time, I worry about break-in." It made sense, but something felt off. The way she wouldn't look directly at me, how she kept checking her phone. She stayed that first night, but she was quiet, almost withdrawn. "You need rest," she said when I tried to start a conversation. "I make food, you sleep." The next morning she said she needed to go handle some family business and would be back in a few days. "My mother need me for hospital follow-up," she explained, already packing a bag. "I come back soon, take care of you properly." That was the last time I saw her in person. She stopped answering my calls, replied to texts with brief, non-committal responses. "Busy with family," she would text back. "Talk later." When I called the restaurant where she'd claimed to work, they said no one by that name had ever worked there. "No Siri Khan here," the manager said in broken English. "You sure about name?" Confused and hurt, I assumed she'd been overwhelmed by the accident and my near-death experience. Maybe she'd realized she wasn't ready for the responsibility of caring for an injured partner. I was heartbroken, but I tried to understand. Recovery was slow and lonely. My Australian friends visited when they could, but mostly I was alone with my thoughts and my healing body. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, I got a call that changed everything. It was from my bank in Australia, not my local Bangkok bank account, but my home account where my pension was deposited. "Mr. Gordon Mitchell," the voice was professional but concerned. "This is Sarah from Commonwealth Bank. We've received some documentation regarding your account. Could you please confirm that you're alive?" The question was so bizarre that I thought it was a prank call. "Of course I'm alive," I said, laughing, despite the absurdity. "I'm talking to you right now. Why would you ask that?" There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Sir, we've received a death certificate and insurance claim documentation. Someone has been attempting to access your accounts, claiming to be your beneficiary." My blood went cold. The laughter died in my throat. "What do you mean, death certificate?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I asked them to email me copies of the documents immediately. What I saw made my stomach drop to the floor. There was my name, Gordon Mitchell, listed in a Thai death certificate dated 3 days after my accident, the same 3 days I'd been unconscious in the hospital. The cause of death was listed as motorcycle accident injuries. Below that was an insurance claim form, signed by someone claiming to be my designated beneficiary, Siri Khan. She'd listed herself as my common-law wife and provided documentation showing she was entitled to my life insurance payout and bank accounts. "This can't be real," I whispered to my empty apartment. The Australian bank had been suspicious because my pension payments were still being processed, suggesting I was still alive. But she'd also been working on my Bangkok bank account, where she was legitimately listed as a beneficiary. "We need you to come in immediately," Sarah said, "or provide proof of life documentation. This is a very serious matter." I immediately called Bangkok Bank, my hands shaking as I dialed. After being transferred through 3 different departments, I finally reached someone who could access my account. "Please hold while I check your account status," the representative said. The news was worse than I'd feared. 2 large withdrawals had been made in the past week, nearly $40,000, almost my entire savings. "But I'm not dead," I kept repeating to the banker, as if saying it louder would somehow undo what had happened. "I'm right here talking to you." The bank representative was sympathetic, but explained that they'd followed proper procedures. "We received valid death certificate from local authorities," she said in careful English, "and beneficiary present all correct paperwork. We must follow law." They'd received valid documentation showing my death, and Siri Khan had presented herself as my legal beneficiary with all the right paperwork. They'd held the funds for the required waiting period, then released them when no challenges were filed. "Can you check security cameras?" I asked desperately. "Did you verify the death certificate with local authorities?" The banker promised to look into it, but warned that recovering the funds would be a complex legal process. Very difficult once money leave Thailand, she admitted. You need police report, lawyer. Many documents. I called the police next, my leg throbbing as I hobbled to the station. The officer who took my report seemed unsurprised. Apparently similar scams were becoming more common in tourist areas. Many Western men trust too quickly, he said, not unkindly, stamping my report with official-looking seals. These women very smart, very organized. Not just one person, whole network. He explained that creating fake death certificates wasn't difficult if you knew the right people. During your unconscious time, easy for someone to say you die, he continued. Hospital very busy, no one check everything. During the chaos of my accident when I was unconscious and alone, it would have been easy for someone to claim I'd died. The investigation would take time, he warned, and the chances of recovering the money were slim. She'd probably transfer money out of Thailand already, he said, closing my file. Maybe Cambodia, maybe Philippines, very hard to track. Over the next few weeks, pieces of the puzzle fell into place like a nightmare coming together. I hired a private investigator, one of the few expenses I could still afford with what little money remained. This not unusual case, he said during our first meeting. I see many times before. What he uncovered was devastating. Sirikan wasn't her real name. Her real name was Pornthaida, and she was part of an organized group that targeted older Western men building long-term relationships to gain financial access. Very professional operation, the investigator explained, showing me surveillance photos. They study you for weeks before approach. The sick mother, the family emergencies, even the friends I'd met. It had all been carefully orchestrated. The investigator showed me surveillance photos of her with other Western men, playing the same role, using variations of the same story. Same script, different actors, he said grimly. She'd done this before, multiple times. The address she'd given me for her family was fake. The restaurant job was fabricated. Even some of the relatives I'd met were paid actors. This woman here, he pointed to a photo of Sirikan's supposed sister, she worked with many different women. Professional actress for scam? The most crushing revelation was that she'd been planning this from the moment we met. The insurance conversation, the beneficiary paperwork, it had all been leading to this moment. She'd just been waiting for the right opportunity. Your accident, perfect timing for them, the investigator said. Provide confusion, chaos needed for fake death certificate. My accident had been like winning the lottery for her scam. The investigator estimated that I was her third victim in 5 years. The previous 2 men had never reported the crimes, too embarrassed to admit they'd been so thoroughly deceived. One man lose entire retirement savings, he told me. Other man become homeless, had to return to his home country with nothing. The strangest part of the whole ordeal was dealing with being legally dead in Thailand while very much alive. The fake death certificate had been filed with local authorities, and correcting it required navigating a bureaucratic nightmare that seemed designed to drive people insane. You need medical records from hospital stay, the clerk at the district office explained. Witness statements, doctor signatures and stamps from many departments. I needed medical records from my hospital stay, witness statements and various stamps and signatures from multiple government offices. Each step cost money I no longer had. Processing fee for death certificate correction, one official said, holding out his hand. Authentication fee for hospital records, said another. My pension from Australia was temporarily suspended while they investigated the fraud. I was living on the kindness of expat friends and what little cash I had left. You can stay in my spare room until you sort this out, Jerry offered, despite our previous disagreements. The apartment Sirikan and I had shared became too expensive without her contribution, which I now realized had mostly been my own money recycled back to me. She very clever, the landlord said, when I explained why I couldn't pay rent. She tell me you might die. Ask about what happened to apartment. I moved into a small studio in a less desirable part of town, surrounded by the smell of fish sauce and the sound of construction. The isolation was crushing. Word had spread through the expat community about what had happened to me. Some were sympathetic, bringing food and offering advice. Others were judgmental. How could you have been so stupid? More than one person asked. We all warned you about moving too fast. They weren't wrong, but their questions hurt anyway. I'd trusted someone completely, and that trust had been weaponized against me. The worst part was that I still missed her. Despite knowing it had all been fake, I found myself remembering the good moments. Her laugh, the way she'd curl up against me while watching TV, the pride in her eyes when she introduced me to people. None of it real, I kept telling myself. All just performance. My rational mind knew none of it had been real, but my heart hadn't caught up yet. 6 months later, I was still in Thailand, but barely hanging on. My savings were gone. My pension had been restored, but was tied up in legal proceedings, and my visa status was complicated by my temporary death. The police investigation had stalled. No new evidence, the officer told me during my monthly check-in. Case remain open but not active. Sirikan, whatever her real name was, had vanished completely. The private investigator suspected she'd moved to a different country, possibly Cambodia or the Philippines, to start the process over with new victims. They move every few years, he explained, like virus always finding new host. I'd aged years in those 6 months. The stress had taken a physical toll. I'd lost weight, my hair had gone completely grey, and the injuries from the accident still bothered me. More than that, though, I'd lost something harder to define. My ability to trust, maybe. My confidence in my own judgment. I used to think I was smart, I told the mirror in my tiny bathroom. Good at reading people. I'd started attending a support group for expat fraud victims. There were more of us than I'd expected. Men who'd lost money, hearts, and dignity to elaborate scams. My girl told me she needed money for her buffalo, one British man shared. Turns out she didn't even have a buffalo. We shared stories and coping strategies. It helped to know I wasn't the only one who'd been fooled so completely. Some of the men had been victimized multiple times, never quite learning to protect themselves from their own loneliness and hope. The heart wants what it wants, one American retiree said. Even when the brain knows better. I was determined not to become one of them. The group leader, a British retiree who'd lost his house deposit to a similar scheme years earlier, always reminded us that the shame belonged to the criminals, not to us. They're professionals, he'd say during our weekly meetings. This is what they do for a living. We were just people looking for companionship. It was logical advice, but logic and emotion don't always align. Still feels like my fault, I admitted to the group. I should have known better. I eventually had to make a choice, stay in Thailand and try to rebuild from nothing, or cut my losses and go home to Australia. The Thailand I'd fallen in love with, or thought I had, no longer existed for me. Every street in Pattaya held memories of Sirikan, real or manufactured. Every woman who smiled at me made me suspicious. She just being friendly, I'd tell myself when a waitress was nice. Not everyone is a scammer. But the doubt was always there. I was becoming paranoid and bitter, exactly the kind of expat I'd always pitied. So I went home. Jerry drove me to the airport, my few remaining possessions fitting in a single suitcase. Thailand will still be here if you decide to come back, he said at departure. Maybe give it a few years. The flight back to Australia felt like admitting defeat. I was 59 years old, nearly broke, and starting over in a country that no longer felt like home. Lismore looked smaller and greyer than I remembered, the streets full of memories from my old life. I rented a tiny apartment near my old neighborhood and tried to piece together some kind of life. You look terrible, my ex-wife said when she saw me at the grocery store. Thailand didn't work out like you planned. The hardest part was explaining what had happened to family and old friends. Most were kind, but I could see the questions in their eyes. How could someone so smart have been so stupid? These things happen, my daughter said, hugging me in her kitchen. You're not the first person to get scammed. I asked myself the same question daily. How had I been so blind? I found work doing electrical repairs part-time, enough to supplement my pension and maintain some dignity. The physical work was harder now, my legs still stiff from the accident, but it kept my mind occupied. Good to have you back, Gordon, my old boss said. You still remember which end of the wire is hot. Slowly, very slowly, I started to heal, not from the money loss, that was gone forever, but from the emotional devastation. I learned to forgive myself for wanting companionship, for trusting someone who seemed to care about me. The Thai woman I'd thought I knew had never existed, but my feelings for her had been real. That wasn't something to be ashamed of. It took 2 years, but I eventually told the whole story to a new friend, a widow named Margaret, who'd moved to Lismore after her own retirement. We met at a community centre cooking class, both of us trying to learn something new. I made some mistakes in Thailand, I said over coffee one afternoon. She listened without judgment as I told her everything, the romance, the scam, the fake death certificate. She didn't ask how I could have been so naive. Loneliness makes us vulnerable, she said simply, reaching across to touch my hand. There's no shame in wanting to be loved. We became close friends. Then something more. We've been together 3 years now, taking things slowly, building trust carefully. I know you've been hurt, she said early in our relationship. We'll go at whatever pace feels right. I never did get my money back. Sometimes I wonder what Sirikan, or whatever her name really was, is doing now, whether she's moved on to other victims. Probably married to some poor German by now, Margaret jokes when I get too serious about it. But mostly I don't think about her anymore. The dead man in that Bangkok newspaper was buried along with the naive hope I'd carried to Thailand. What rose from that grave was more cautious, but also more grateful for genuine connection when it finally comes. Love shouldn't cost you everything, Margaret said recently, while we watched the sunset from my apartment balcony. Real love adds to your life, doesn't take it away. I'm still learning to trust that truth, but I'm getting there. The man who died in that Thai hospital was reborn in Australia, scarred but wiser. And sometimes, that's the best you can hope for.